That day the sun was cruel. The earth became a mirror of heat as its blazing rays landed heavily on the stones. Tourists grabbed water bottles and shielded their eyes as the air shimmered and sweat trickled down their faces. But in the middle of it all, a tomb guard stood motionless, his eyes fixed front, his face set in stone, his white-gloved hand lifted in a flawless salute. His duck boots shined like mirrors. 5 hours had passed while he stood there. Not a single step, not a flinch, not a movement. The audience muttered incredulously. One man whispered, "No one can last this long." Another person shook his head and muttered, "He's going to collapse. Mom, why doesn't he stop?" A young child whispered as he pulled his mother's sleeve. The response was silent. The guard believed that this was not a performance. This was duty. Before we continue this amazing story, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments sections from where you are watching this. The silence was broken, though, by a sound. The low, snarling rumble of motorcycles, first faint, like distant thunder, then closer and louder. The source was soon revealed. A group of motorcycle riders, their engines roaring as they raced into the hallowed grounds, their black jackets glistening with patches, their laughter echoing through the air. The crowd's reverent silence started to break. Children were drawn closer by their parents. Veterans frowned and crossed their arms. It was almost like a storm storming into a temple when the engines growled. The bikers slowed as they approached the border of the grounds, and one visitor whispered, "They wouldn't dare, but they did." Whispers of the audience were muffled by the reverberation and rattling of their motors against the marble. The guard was not like them. They were noisy, irresponsible, and unfit. Nevertheless, the guard remained still. He kept his hand up in the ideal position, saluting the sky. His jaw tensed, but his eyes remained unwavering and unmoving. The world assumed he would go, that even he would falter in the face of contempt, noise, and mayhem. What followed, however, demonstrated why even the biggest storms can be sounded by quiet. Since these motorcyclists weren't just passing by, they had no intention of admiring. They came to put him to the test. The exam was only getting started. The spectators only saw a uniformed soldier standing in the sweltering heat, but most people would never know the tale behind that salute. Michael Carter was a 34-year-old soldier, brother and son who had previously sacrificed parts of himself in distant battles. As a youngster, Michael had not always envisioned himself as a tomb guard. In the little village where he grew up, military duty was more than just a custom, and flags were displayed on porches. It was nearly fate. He had been pushed most by his younger brother Daniel, but his father and grandfather had also served. Daniel was the one who signed up first, the one who was bold and adventurous. Michael followed because he couldn't allow his brother to march into danger by himself, not because he had to. The two brothers fought alongside each other in the scorching desert of a strange nation, until the day came when Daniel did not return, and Michael did. Nothing appeared to be able to fill the void that loss had made in him. He had been unable to sleep for months. He was reminded of gunfire by every loud noise. He thought about his brother's laughter, which was lost forever, every time there was silence. He considered quitting the military, disappearing into normal life, and forgetting everything. Then he went to Arlington. Nevertheless, he observed the spot where quiet itself became sacrosanct, surrounded by innumerable white markers, and a vow sparked inside of him. He would protect the memory of Daniel and all fallen soldiers if he was unable to bring them back. Michael Carter became a tomb guard in this way. The training was unrelenting. Hours were spent memorizing every rule, custom, and tradition that dated back decades while walking in perfect time. Character violations were prohibited for guards. Nothing could faze them, not even heat, snow, rain, or contempt. Their shield was the discipline of quiet, which Michael accepted as a lifeline rather than as a job. Daniel was the recipient of each salute. There was a whispered assurance during each hour of quiet. "You are not forgotten." However, Michael was carrying more than just his personal history on that smoldering afternoon. He was bearing the burden of a location that had far more significance than himself. For visitors, Arlington National Cemetery was a remarkable sight. It was sacred territory for veterans. It housed more than 400,000 service members. Every tomb represents a sacrifice, every stone a tale. And at the center was the tomb of the unidentified soldier, which was watched over day and night during times of peace, storm, and conflict. This was more than grass and marble. It was honor's very essence. That was why, despite his muscles screaming and his eyes stinging from perspiration, Michael stood motionless. Applause was not the reason he was saluting. He wasn't giving the tourists a salute. For the innumerable voices that were no longer able to speak, he was saluting, and the bikers rode into this hallowed silence. In the neighboring towns, the gang was well known. They were not merely recreational cyclists. They exuded a sense of superiority that demanded notice. Patches, skull insignias, and inscriptions mocking authority were all over their coats. Some muttered that they were connected to neighborhood pubs, while others linked them to legal issues. Above all, though, they took great pleasure in making fun of things that other people valued. Their interest became a challenge when they learned that a guard had been standing in the heat for hours. They reasoned that there was no better way to demonstrate that this entire ritual was a hollow charade. They saw the tomb guard as merely a man in uniform, a toy soldier too rigid to defend himself, rather than as a sign of sacrifice. They chuckled at the idea of disrupting his focus, of demonstrating to the audience that noise and conceit could break silence, that it was amusement to them, but an impending insult to the veterans in the audience. A group of older men stood silently on the stairs close to the god, holding hats that were embroidered with the names of long-gone conflicts, such as Korea, Vietnam, and Iraq. Their eyes widened as they heard the motorcycles getting louder. These men understood what it meant to serve, to bury comrades, and to bear the wound of loss like an unseen scar at home. While tourists struggled with their cameras, uncertain whether they were about to witness a spectacle or a shame, a mother nearby drew her kid closer, whispering, "This is hallowed ground, don't forget that." Michael Carter stayed still the entire time, his salute unwavering, his jaw set, his thoughts concentrated. Memories flashed through the interior. Daniel's final words before the bomb carried him away. Daniel singing off-key while on patrol. Daniel joking in the barracks. The motorcyclist's roar was more than just sound. Both his discipline and the promise he made to his brother's memory were put to the test. And what would it say about the promise he carried if he violated now, even once, even for a moment? He refused to move now. With their tires crunching on the stone and their motors growling, the bikers approached. With his eyes fixed on the guard, their leader grinned and tossed his cigarette to the ground. The audience stiffened, veterans' fists tightened, kids huddled behind their parents. The test was underway, and the world was about to witness what occurs when unwavering honor and conceit collide. The bikers didn't show up out of nowhere. They broke the stillness. Like thunder, engines growled. Their laughing reverberated in the solemn air as the group slowed to a crawl and circled close to the sacred walkway, their boots scuffing against the stone. It appeared as though a cathedral had been overrun by anarchy. Visitors put down their cameras. Children were dragged behind their parents. Veterans' jaws hardened like stone as they tensed up. Michael Carter, the tomb guard, however, was unmovable. Perfect stance, eyes fixed, white-gloved hand raised in salutation. This was what he had been groomed for. This was what he had lived for. However, he was not admired by the bikers. Their purpose was to shatter him. The silence was broken by the first gear. "Hey boy soldier, how much time will you spend playing statue?" "What?" The exhaust roared like a challenge as one rider purposefully revved his engine. Just a few inches from the guard's boots, another spat onto the ground. The audience let out a gasp. Michael remained motionless as the veterans balled their fists. He clenched his jaw. Indeed, a drop of perspiration trickled down his cheek, but he continued to salute. That only gave them greater energy. One snarled, "I bet he's too scared to blink. Observe him." Another shook his head mockingly. "Man is just a puppet." Their rude, boisterous laughter reverberated off the marble walls. The minutes dragged on, each one more burdensome than the last. The bikers became agitated and circled closer, making louder taunts. With a metallic cling, one of them opened a beer can, drained it, and dropped it on the stone. He smirked at the silent guard as he crushed the can beneath his boot. A wave of rage swept over the audience. "Disgraceful," a veteran with a worn cap mumbled, his hands shaking as he held his cane. "Why are they being mean to him?" a small child muttered to his mother nearby. She hushed him, her eyes fixed on the guard, her voice harsh. The bikers were indifferent. They flourished on the stress and agony they produced. Leaning forward on his handlebars, another motorcyclist spat out hurtful words. "You believe you're a hero. You are nothing." The words were cutting, but Michael's silence was even sharper, just standing there like an idiot. Every taunt, jeer, and disgusting chuckle was met with silence. It wasn't a sign of weakness, it was rebellion, and they were angry at that quiet. At last, the leader, a towering man with a jagged scar over his cheek, made the decision to press on. Swinging a leg over his bike, he silenced his engine and strolled ahead. The sound of his bulky boots reverberated off the stone. The audience held its breath. He circled Michael like a predator and came to a stop a few steps from him. "Well, what are you protecting?" he scoffed as he glanced to the tomb beyond him. "Just a stone box. Do you believe that to be significant?" People in the crowd started to gasp. Those remarks were blasphemous to the soldiers, not just disrespectful. An older man with rage in his eyes stepped forward. However, his spouse took hold of his arm and muttered, "No, don't." The guards saluted, still and unmoving. "Bet your brother's in one of these graves," the biker said, leaning in and exhaling sharply. "Too far," shouted the throng. "I bet he's rotting under your feet right now. Horrible. Leave him alone." However, Michael remained still. For a split second his jaw shook, and his eyes briefly flashed with sorrow, but he kept his hand up. He stayed in formation. Satisfied, the leader grinned. "You see? Just a mannequin, that is." The bikers became more daring. One drove his motor dangerously near as he circled behind the guard. A crumpled wrapper was thrown at his feet by another. The purpose of each deed was to degrade. Every action was intended to provoke. However, silence continued to be their enemy. And then the throng started to pay attention, first in whispers, then in murmurs, and finally in something more powerful. Respect gradually grew among the spectators, as one veteran mumbled, "Look at him, still standing, still saluting." Another woman whispered, "He's not moving, not even for them." Yes, the bikers were noisy, but the guards' silence was more powerful. The minutes passed slowly. The sun's intensity increased. Michael's uniform was soaked in sweat, yet his posture was flawless. The motorcyclists were growing impatient. Their taunts were ineffective. Finally, increasing his voice, the leader growled, "Hey, soldier boy, do you believe that you are superior to us? You believe that standing there demonstrates your strength?" Nothing had changed. The smirk on the leader's face turned into a frown. "All right," he extended his hand only inches from the guard's shoulder and said, "Let's see if you can stand when I make you move." Once more the audience gasped, some yelling for him to stop. Parents protected their kids' eyes. Prayers were whispered by the veterans. Michael was unmoving as the biker's fingers hovered, shivering in anticipation of contact. Beneath that stern exterior, however, his heart thumped, not with dread, but with memories of Daniel's bravery, his humor, and his sacrifice. Never flinch, never falter, never forget was the vow Michael had made. It wouldn't be broken by a biker's shove, an insult, or a storm of scorn. He wasn't weak by remaining silent. It was power. It was a mark of honor. His brother's remembrance was etched into the silence. The damage was done, but the leader's hand temporarily slipped to his side. Someone had crossed the boundary. It was the height of the stress. The throng waited in silence. The eyes of the veterans were burning. Kids held on to their parents. The slightest movements were amplified. "That's more power than 1,000 guns," said a veteran, while a child murmured, "He's like a superhero." The guard's gaze briefly shifted to the tomb behind him. He was reminded of his commitment by every tombstone and marker. His brother, his fellow warriors, the unidentified heroes who received everything. Michael's answer reflected the fact that the sacrifices engraved on that sacred land were far more significant than the biker's shove. Noise could be drowned out by silence. Arrogance could be crushed by discipline. The undeserving could be degraded by honor without a single strike. The leader took another step back, removing himself from the atmosphere that encircled Michael Carter as he realized the gravity of the situation. Sensing the change, his gang grudgingly followed, their engines idling uneasily. Their goal had been to shatter him. Rather, they were themselves broken, not in a physical sense, but in spirit and will. The astonishment of the spectators was evident. Phones recorded, cameras clicked. The quiet that shouted louder than turmoil is how witnesses would later characterize it. Michael's hands did not waver, fingers in white gloves, perfectly straight. Sweat trickled down his temple, but the storm was contained within his eyes like a regulated fire. He wasn't only standing there, he was upholding the unshakable honor principle, which teaches that respect must be earned rather than demanded. Minutes went by. Time seemed to have stopped. The bikers shuffled uneasily, uncertain whether to confront or run. The nervous onlookers drew closer now, feeling the confrontation's climactic pulse. Then Michael gently turned back to the tomb without saying anything. Unwavering salute. The message was clear just by his presence. Order persists even when chaos rises. Honor never fades, even in the face of disrespect. After losing without exchanging a single blow, The motorcyclists finally grumbled to themselves and withdrew, their pride in ruins. Collectively, the audience let forth a sigh of relief, wonder, and reverence. The ensuing hush was deafening. It was a reverent, powerful, and meaningful silence. The world realized something important in that silence. Some wars are won without bloodshed. The Guard had acted out of discipline and commitment rather than anger. Certain triumphs are asserted solely through composure, bravery, and unwavering moral conviction. A child pulled at his mother's sleeve, and a veteran came forward, eyes sparkling, and murmured to his companion, "I've never seen anything like it, ever. He's a hero, isn't he, Mom?" Sweat-soaked yet determined, Michael Carter refused to turn. He was not smiling, simply keeping his palm up and his eyes forward. He honored the sacred task that had led him here rather than himself. Arlington was more than just a cemetery at that precise moment. It served as evidence. It was full of honor, respect, and the silent strength of one man who would not give up. The motorcyclists had left. There was silence among the crowd. Even so, Michael Carter saluted. The air was heavy with quiet, thicker than the burning sun overhead. Michael Carter had kept his ground for 5 hours, through insults, heat, and now the motorcycle leader's blatant physical challenge. But the fight was far from over. With their eyes darting anxiously at the assembling audience, the bikers, embarrassed without even a scratch, mumbled under their breath. A group of Arlington police and security officers arrived from the edge of the walkway. With cameras in hand and prepared to step in, they had been keeping an eye on the chaos. They moved ahead after noticing the bikers' boldness and the immovable guard. With a stern voice, one officer said, "Sir, you need to step back." The leader laughed uneasily, trying to hide the fear in his eyes. "This is restricted ground. Constrained," he whispered. "We were just admiring," but nobody took him seriously. Michael Carter, meanwhile, continued to stand at attention with his white-gloved hand up in the proper salute. He didn't look around. He remained silent. He went back to the silent routine that had characterized his work since the first hour of the day. The entire scene, the fleeing bikers, the stunned bystanders, and the lone guard, was captured by some of the crowd members who held up cameras. Unfazed, not broken, not to be forgotten. Flashing phones and live-recorded footage instantly went viral. With tears in his eyes, a veteran whispered to his friend, "That man didn't even lift a finger," and still he prevailed. A child gripped his mother's hand and whispered again, "Mom, he's a genuine hero." Michael's concentration, however, remained unwavering. Every motion and gesture remained exact, purposeful, and holy. He no longer merely saluted out of obligation. It had come to represent victory through silence. Heads lowered, the bikers' bluster gone, they were being escorted away. Once the leader who had shoved him earlier turned to face him, his eyes wide with shock. He had anticipated chaos, capitulation, and maybe fear. Instead, he found a man who could not be shaken, and so the guard remained, his salute continuing, his devotion absolute, his dignity unbroken. Hours passed, tourists drifted away, cameras and phones now lowered, whispers fading into the heat. Michael remained at his post. 5 hours had become 6, and yet he did not move. His posture like marble, unwavering. Sweat carved lines down his face, soaking the fabric of his uniform, yet the precision of the salute never faltered. Every visitor, veteran and child present, had observed something that day that transcended the ordinary. Silence had become a weapon, and honor its shield. The tomb was not just protected by rituals, but by a living testament to sacrifice and discipline. The lesson, though subtle, resonated deeper than any roar of engines or clatter of cameras. The quiet heroism of one man had surpassed all external disruption. Even the Arlington police officers, trained to maintain order, stepped back, recognizing the power of what they were witnessing. They had expected to enforce rules, to prevent chaos, but instead, they found the embodiment of steadfast principle. Michael Carter stood, a solitary figure against the blaze of the sun, unyielding, resolute, and profoundly human in his discipline. In that silence, more was said than any words could convey. The crowd felt it. The veterans felt it. Children, uncomprehending and full, felt it. Respect was no longer demanded. It was understood. The sun scorched overhead, yet he did not falter. The wind, subtle or gusting, brushed against him, yet he remained motionless. Time, seemingly, had slowed. In each second, the weight of countless sacrifices, the gravity of memory, and the depth of devotion converged into a singular, unbroken moment. Here, amid marble and grass, history was honored not through spectacle, not through fanfare, but through discipline, courage, and the quiet assertion of duty. The bikers, now at a distance, could no longer claim power over the scene. They had attempted disruption and were defeated, not by force, but by the resolute integrity of a single man. Michael Carter's hands, still steady, spoke volumes. His eyes, unblinking, were a mirror to the dedication that every soldier, past and present, had sworn to uphold. The lesson was clear, etched into the consciousness of every witness. True honor is not loud, it does not boast, it endures, regardless of provocation. That afternoon, the world had seen the embodiment of a principle far greater than any individual ego. As the sun crept higher, Michael Carter remained at his post, unmoved, unswerving. Every bead of sweat, every aching muscle, was a testament to discipline and devotion. The visitors who lingered watched in quiet awe, some lowering their cameras, others whispering to companions about the bravery they were witnessing. Michael's gaze never wavered from the tomb, every second of his unbroken salute a silent tribute to those who had gone before. Each movement of the crowd, every shuffle of feet or whisper of curiosity, was absorbed and ignored. The tomb guard was impervious to distraction, anchored firmly by the weight of duty and memory. The hum of distant city life seemed miles away, inconsequential compared to the sacred space in which he stood. Time stretched, minutes folding into hours, yet his posture never faltered, his hand never dropped. The significance of his action began to ripple subtly through the onlookers, a lesson in endurance, respect, and moral strength that transcended words. Veterans nodded imperceptibly, children pointed with wide eyes, and even the most skeptical visitors began to recognize that what they were witnessing was something extraordinary. Every gaze that met his, every whisper that passed through the air, became a tribute to the quiet heroism of one man who refused to yield to chaos or insult. The heat of the day pressed down, yet Michael stood resolute, a living emblem of sacrifice, resilience, and unwavering principle. His uniform clung to him with sweat, his skin burned by the sun, yet the precision of the salute remained perfect. One could see the tension in his jaw, the strain in his muscles, but there was no falter, no bend, no hesitation. Around him the world seemed to pause, acknowledging the steadfastness of a soldier who honored his promise, not through words, not through defiance, but through absolute presence. Observers began to understand the depth of what they were seeing. A soldier's pledge, lived in real time, unbroken and solemn. The bikers had attempted to disrupt, to provoke, to mock, yet they had been rendered powerless by the force of silence and honor. And now, even as they faded from the scene, the echo of their challenge lingered only to highlight the magnitude of Michael's resolve. He was no longer just a man standing in the sun. He was a sentinel of memory, a guardian of the unspoken covenant between the living and the fallen, a reminder that some battles are fought in silence, some victories are earned without weapons, and some heroes are measured not by applause, but by unwavering commitment. The crowd, initially buzzing with curiosity, now absorbed the weight of the lessons silently, collectively recognizing that they had witnessed a profound moment of courage and respect. Each breath, each pause, each subtle shift of sunlight across the marble became a silent witness to the steadfastness of one individual who had chosen to honor the fallen in a way that words could not capture. The sun climbed higher, the air shimmered with heat, yet Michael Carter remained, a monument of dedication and a living testament to the enduring power of discipline, duty, and unyielding respect. Every visitor left carrying a fragment of that lesson, a quiet understanding that true heroism sometimes speaks only through steadfast presence, unwavering gaze, and the unbroken hand of salute. In that moment, Arlington National Cemetery was not merely a place of memory, it was a stage where the enduring power of honor and silence had been made palpable, a testament that one man's discipline could outshine the chaos of the world, and that the smallest gestures, when executed with absolute fidelity, could resonate more profoundly than the loudest disruptions. Minutes passed, yet Michael Carter did not move. His salute remained perfect, his posture unbroken, a seamless combination of discipline and devotion that seemed almost superhuman in its endurance. The crowd had grown still, collectively holding its breath as the enormity of the moment settled in. Veterans' eyes glistened with pride and recognition. Mothers drew their children closer, whispering about the bravery unfolding before them. Every footstep, every whisper, every shuffle was met with the unyielding presence of a soldier who had made a vow that transcended pain, insult, and provocation. The bikers, once a source of noise and disturbance, now felt the invisible weight of Michael's discipline pressing against their arrogance. Their laughter had faded into uncertainty, their bravado dampened by the realization that the quietest force can sometimes be the most powerful. The leader of the group, scarred and imposing, hesitated, sensing the authority radiating from the tomb guard, not from size, weaponry, or threat, but from an immovable commitment to principle and memory. Each member of the audience, whether veteran or child, understood in that moment that Michael's steadfast salute represented a larger truth. Respect and honor are cultivated through action, not words, through consistency, not spectacle. The sun continued its ascent, the heat intensifying, yet Michael remained resolute. Beads of sweat traced lines down his face. His uniform clung to him with moisture. Muscles screamed in protest, yet there was no deviation. The bikers' attempts to provoke or intimidate were rendered meaningless, their every insult neutralized by a wall of unwavering commitment. Observers could see it. The human body is formidable when allied with discipline, and the spirit is unbreakable when fueled by memory and purpose. The sacred tomb before him, the countless stones around him, and the memory of his brother Daniel infused each second with solemnity. He was a living conduit between the past and the present, embodying the promise that no sacrifice would be forgotten, no duty left unfulfilled. The quiet, once nearly invisible amid the murmurs of visitors, now pulsed through the air like a tangible force, commanding attention, respect, and introspection. Cameras clicked, not to sensationalize, but to preserve a moment of integrity so profound that it demanded recognition. Even those who had approached skeptically now understood that this was not mere ritual, not a performance for observers, but a sacred act of honor manifested through unwavering action. The bikers, sensing the tide of public sentiment and the imperceptible moral weight pressing upon them, began to withdraw reluctantly, their engines no longer roaring, their gestures subdued, their presence diminished by the magnitude of one man's discipline. Every step they took away from the tomb reinforced the lesson for all present, that chaos can be countered by calm, disrespect can be met with dignity, and mockery can be silenced by steadfast commitment. Michael's mind remained focused, cycling through memories of Daniel, the battlefield, and the countless fallen whose names and stories were etched in the marble around him. He did not relax, did not glance around. His world consisted of the tomb, his salute, and the sacred duty he had accepted. In every subtle movement of wind, in every shift of light, in every breath of the onlookers, the resonance of honor persisted. The lesson was clear. True strength does not always roar. Sometimes it stands, silent and unwavering, a monument to all that is sacred and enduring. The bikers were gone, the crowd was hushed, and Michael remained at attention, a sentinel whose valor required no applause, no validation, no recognition beyond the silent affirmation of his own conscience and the enduring memory of those he honored. Time seemed to slow, elongating every second into a testament of human resilience and dedication. The power of his steadfast presence had transformed what could have been chaos into a profound lesson in courage, patience, and moral strength. Arlington itself seemed to acknowledge the moment, the wind whispering through the flags, the marble reflecting the intensity of the sun, all bearing witness to a soldier's vow that had been tested and proven. For all who saw, this was more than a story. It was an embodiment of principles lived to their fullest, a quiet demonstration that one individual, acting with absolute fidelity to honor, can stand as a beacon of inspiration for countless others. At last, with the bikers gone and the crowd's murmurs fading into silence, Michael Carter finally allowed a subtle shift in stance, enough to ease the strain in his muscles but not enough to break the integrity of his salute. He remained facing the tomb, eyes forward, every motion deliberate, embodying calm and authority. Veterans approached, quietly nodding or offering a soft salute of acknowledgement, their respect palpable. Children peeked out from behind parents, whispering about the courage they had just witnessed. Michael's breath was steady, his focus unwavering, a testament to hours of preparation, years of training, and a lifetime of personal resolve shaped by memory and loss. He reached into his uniform pocket and retrieved a small worn dog tag, the one that belonged to his brother Daniel. Holding it softly, he whispered a private dedication. "This is for you, Daniel," letting the moment of remembrance connect the living with the fallen. No one else needed to hear. The act itself sufficed. The wind moved through the flags marking the graves, rustling softly, as if the very earth were acknowledging his silent tribute. Every head in the crowd lowered in quiet reflection, sensing the gravity and purity of the act they had just witnessed. Michael took a slow step back, recentering himself, the dog tag carefully tucked away, and resumed the position that had come to define his day, hand lifted in flawless salute, posture perfect, eyes forward, a solitary figure holding a sacred vow. The sun continued its arc across the sky, casting long shadows over Arlington's hallowed grounds, highlighting the marble and grass, the markers of sacrifice, and the sentinel who had made the moment immortal. The story, already captured on countless cameras and phones, began to spread beyond the cemetery, reaching audiences who could not physically witness the event but could feel its resonance through screens. Millions would watch, in awe of the silent courage, the unflinching commitment, and the quiet power of one man standing for honor, duty, and remembrance. Michael did not seek recognition. His fulfillment came from adherence to principle, the invisible affirmation of those who had served and fallen before him, and the knowledge that his brother's memory had been honored. Eventually, the visitors dispersed, leaving the tomb and Michael Carter in a profound quiet, a silence more meaningful than any applause. He remained, ever vigilant, a living embodiment of the truth that discipline, respect, and courage do not require noise, that the quietest acts can carry the heaviest weight, and that one individual's steadfast devotion can inspire far beyond the immediate moment. Michael Carter's stand at Arlington National Cemetery had transcended the ordinary, converting chaos into reverence, mockery into awe, and provocation into proof of unshakable moral integrity. The day ended not with recognition or fanfare, but with a solemn acknowledgement of the enduring power of silent honor. As shadows lengthened and the sun dipped toward the horizon, Michael finally lowered his hand, but the essence of his tribute remained etched in the minds of all who witnessed it, a timeless testament that silence, courage, and devotion can triumph where violence and arrogance cannot. Arlington was quiet, the bikers gone. The lesson learned: bravery is sometimes silent, heroism sometimes invisible, and honor always endures, regardless of whether anyone is watching. Michael Carter, exhausted yet resolute, stood as a living monument to these truths, the embodiment of remembrance, discipline, and unwavering dedication. His act would be remembered not only for its endurance, but for its deeper resonance, that respect is earned through commitment, that silence can be more commanding than words, and that the living can uphold the memory of the fallen through unshakable action. The wind whispered, flags swayed, and the tombs remained, silent witnesses to a day when one man's steadfast honor spoke louder than any storm. Arlington National Cemetery had been tested, and through Michael Carter's devotion, its sanctity, dignity, and power had been preserved and elevated. In the quiet aftermath, the world had seen a soldier's dedication at its purest, a commitment to duty, family, and the unspoken promise to the fallen that they would never be forgotten. Michael Carter remained, a sentinel of honor, a keeper of memory, a reminder that true heroism is measured not in noise, applause, or recognition, but in the quiet constancy of action, the steadfastness of spirit, and the unbreakable bonds of love, loyalty, and duty.